In this video, I'm going to talk about ideology. I'll start off with a definition and then give you examples in terms of the views of liberals and the views of conservatives. But I want to begin this by talking about the bigger argument that I'm trying to make in presenting this. For those of you who pay attention to politics, you probably know that oftentimes liberals talk about conservatives as if they're the enemy, and conservatives often talk about liberals as if they're the enemy. And they characterize each other in the most negative terms. But the truth is that when you're just thinking in terms of ideology, both the liberals and the conservatives have a thoughtful way and an understandable way of thinking about ideology. And so that's what I want to be sort of the underlying message here, is the idea that people can disagree and not be disagreeable, that we can look at one another, and even if somebody has a different ideology than we do, we can say, I may not agree with that person, but I know where they're coming from. We get along with people who have different religious faiths. We get along with people who like different football teams. We get along with people who we differ with all the time, and this can be the case when it comes to ideology as well. I personally think that younger people are more likely to be tolerant of people with differing views. And so, as I have throughout these lecture videos, often I feel like I put a lot of responsibility on the younger crowd between 18 and let's call it 25. And this is going to be no different. Once again, I think your participation is essential to the health of this democracy. Now, for those of you who are above that age group, I don't want you to think that I think your involvement is not important. I'm above that age group, and I think my involvement is important. But I do think that younger people can bring something in particular to the discussion that maybe older people have trouble with. And so with that, let's get started. As always, when I begin any topic, I begin with a definition. So when I'm talking about ideology, ideology is a system of beliefs and values about the proper order of society, the proper role of government, and the role of tradition. So I want to explain each of these with first talking about liberals and then talking about conservatives. And in doing so, I'm going to introduce some terms, some of which you're familiar with and some of which you're not. So let's begin with liberals. In terms of the proper role of government, liberals believe that the government should be active. Well, what do I mean by active? Abraham Lincoln famously talked about the United States becoming a more perfect union, right? The idea was that we weren't perfect. We weren't ever going to be perfect, but the goal was to get closer to that more perfect union. For liberals, the role of government is to be active in trying to achieve that more perfect union. That the job of the government is to look for areas of injustice, be in tuned to areas of injustice, and when it sees injustice happening, to take an active role in correcting it and making the world and making the United States a more perfect union. Never going to be perfect, but a more perfect union. And so that can be the Congress passing a law and the president signing it into law. That can be the courts making a ruling that creates this more perfect union, but that the government should be active in trying to help create a more perfect union. When it comes to the proper order of society, liberals believe that the proper order should be egalitarian. This is a term that some students might be unfamiliar with, and so let me explain what I mean by egalitarian. Very broadly speaking, an egalitarian society is an equal society. But I don't want to suggest that liberals believe that everybody should be exactly equal, that everybody should make the same amount of money, live in the same size house, drive the same color car, nothing like that. But for liberals, this idea of an egalitarian society is such that there shouldn't be huge disparities in wealth. There shouldn't be people who are fabulously wealthy while others are living in abject poverty. There shouldn't be groups, one group which has access to certain rights and another group that doesn't have access to rights. That there should be this, the government should strive for, society should be organized in a more egalitarian way. And so as far as it concerns having an active government, the government should be actively doing things to help foster and create this more egalitarian society. Then when it comes to tradition, liberals see tradition and traditions in terms of behavior as being dispensable. Now, I don't want to suggest to you that liberals believe that every tradition should be done away with. Traditionally, if you're standing at a door and you see an older person coming up, you hold the door for them. People, at least prior to the pandemic, traditionally people would shake hands with one another. Liberals aren't talking about getting rid of those kinds of traditions. But traditions that make it harder to achieve an egalitarian society, those are the kinds of traditions that liberals believe should be dispensed with. An example of this might be the role of women in society. Traditionally, women stayed home, right? And men went out and worked. For a liberal, this is an example of a tradition that should be dispensed with. If women want to be out in the workplace, they should be able to. If a man wants to stay home and raise his kids, he should be able to, right? That these are the kind of traditions that liberals think are dispensable. We can get rid of these kinds of things. Any tradition that makes it harder to achieve an egalitarian society is a tradition that should be disposed of, that we can get rid of. Now, for conservatives, they have a different take on this. When it comes to the proper role of government, conservatives believe that the government should be limited. And by that I mean, conservatives believe that it's not the job of the government to socially engineer some perfect society, that things should be allowed to change over time, sort of holistically and naturally, that the government should get involved when there's major injustice, when something needs to be done, the government should step in. But that the federal government doesn't need to step in all the time, and it shouldn't be trying to step in all the time, that a lot of things can be handled at the state level, right? That the federal government is supposed to have a limited role as society evolves and works out its own issues. It's not up to the federal government to be trying to tinker with or socially manufacture a certain kind of outcome. Society should be able to develop and holistically, and the government should play a limited role in that. It definitely has a role, but it should be a limited role as people sort out what they want to do by either voting for certain politicians or not voting for certain politicians and getting the change they want that way, rather than the government passing laws or courts passing rulings that change the organization, that change society. And when it comes to the proper order of society, liberals believe that society should be non-egalitarian. Or perhaps a better word would be, it should be a meritocracy. And by that I mean, conservatives believe, and this is true, that in society, talent, initiative, ambition is not equally distributed. Some people have a lot, and some people don't have very much at all. I mean, if you're watching this video, you're probably one of those people who has a lot. You're going to school, you're trying to improve yourself, maybe you're trying to get a better job, you want to transfer to a four-year institution, maybe you have a job plus you're taking classes. You're an example of somebody who is working hard to improve their lot in life, right? But you know people and I know people who are not particularly ambitious. They're not particularly creative. They're not motivated in the same way. I'm related to some of those people. And so for a conservative, the idea is if talent, if ambition, if creativity isn't equally distributed in society, and it's not, then the rewards that come from that shouldn't be equally distributed either. That some people are going to do well, some people are not going to do as well. Some people are going to be the winners in the struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges. Some people are not. And it's not up to the government to try and lift people up from the bottom if they're not trying to improve themselves. And it's not the job of the government to bring people down who have had tremendous success because they have all those abilities. That society should work based on merit. If you work hard, you're going to get stuff. If you don't work hard, you're not going to get stuff, and it's not up to the government to equalize things. Now, I don't want to suggest that anybody who doesn't have stuff isn't working hard. We know that that's not true. There are some people who work really, really hard and don't have very much. But the idea that the government should be trying to balance everything perfectly and make people, and like I say, pull people from the top down and lift people from the bottom up just because of this idea of an egalitarian society, that's not the proper order of society from the perspective of a conservative. And then when it comes to tradition, conservatives believe that they should be maintained. They should be maintained because traditions provide stability in society. That it's important to keep traditions so that we have continuity. Now, if things are going to change, if certain things are going to change, then once again, let them change holistically, naturally. Let society go from having sort of one order or one sort of arrangement to another one. I don't think there are very many conservatives now who would argue that women should all be at the home and men should be the ones out working. There may be some, but probably there are a vast, vast majority. But the idea is to let society come to that conclusion on its own. Let society develop that, have that idea develop naturally. And when there comes a time where that tradition of the woman staying at home and the man going out to work, when that becomes something that's no longer agreed upon within society, well, then we can move on. But it's not the job, it's not the job of the government to dispense with that or to try and get rid of traditions. We'll talk about same-sex marriage in a moment and how conservatives and liberals differ in terms of same-sex marriage. That's the same thing in terms of the importance of maintaining tradition. So I'm going to talk about the policy implications of these different views of ideology in the next video.